The gunshot that shattered the window of the mercantile sent Delilah Warren diving behind a barrel of flour, her heart hammering so violently she thought it might crack her ribs. It was January 1884, and Bisbee, Arizona had just proven itself as lawless as the rumors suggested. She had arrived on the afternoon stage less than 2 hours ago, clutching nothing but a carpet bag, and a letter from her deceased aunt's lawyer informing her that she had inherited a boarding house on the edge of town. The inheritance had seemed like salvation when she received it back in Philadelphia, a lifeline thrown to a 22-year-old woman with no family and dwindling options. Now, crouched in the dusty corner of a frontier store while bullets flew outside, salvation felt more like a cruel joke. The shooting stopped as suddenly as it began. Delilah remained frozen, her dove-gray traveling dress now covered in white flour dust, her dark auburn hair falling from its carefully pinned arrangement. Through the broken window, she could hear men shouting, horses neighing, and then the heavy footsteps of someone entering the mercantile. "You hurt, miss." The voice was deep, roughened by desert wind and sun, but there was genuine concern in it. Delilah looked up and found herself staring at a man who seemed to embody everything she had imagined about the West. He stood well over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered beneath a worn leather vest and dust-covered shirt. His face was weathered and tanned, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days' worth of dark stubble. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a startling shade of gray-blue that seemed far too kind for a place where men shot at each other in broad daylight. He held his hat in his hands, and she noticed his knuckles were scraped and bleeding. "I am unharmed," she managed, though her voice shook. "What happened out there? Couple of drunks from the copper mines got into a disagreement over a card game. Nothing for you to worry about now. They have been hauled off to sleep it off in the jail." He extended a hand to help her up, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip steady and strong. "Name is Gabriel Owens. I work at the Triple Creek Ranch about 5 miles north of here." "Delilah Warren," she said, brushing flour from her skirt with trembling hands. "I just arrived today from Philadelphia. I inherited my aunt's boarding house." Gabriel's eyebrows rose slightly. "You are talking about Clara Warren's place, the one on Copper Road." "Yes, did you know my aunt?" Something shifted in his expression, a softening around his eyes. "Miss Clara was a good woman. She fed me more than once when I first came to Bisbee 3 years ago, did not have much to my name. I am real sorry for your loss." He paused, studying her with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. "That boarding house has been sitting empty for near about 4 months now. It is going to need some fixing up." "I assumed as much." Delilah straightened her shoulders, trying to summon the courage that had carried her across the country alone. "I am not afraid of hard work, Mr. Owens." "I can see that." There was something in his voice, an approval that made her feel less like a frightened Eastern girl and more like someone who might actually survive in this harsh place. "But Copper Road is not the safest part of town for a woman alone, especially after dark. The miners get rowdy, and there are characters around that boarding house who would not think twice about taking advantage of a lady on her own." The mercantile owner, a portly man with a magnificent mustache, emerged from behind the counter where he had been taking cover. "Gabriel is right, Miss Warren. Clara could handle those roughnecks because she had been here for 20 years and they respected her. But you are new, and some of those men would see you as easy pickings." Delilah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the January cold seeping through the broken window. She had expected challenges, certainly, but the reality of her situation was beginning to sink in with uncomfortable clarity. She had almost no money left after the journey west. The boarding house was her only asset, her only chance at independence and survival. If she could not make it work, she would have to find employment, and opportunities for respectable work for women were limited even in frontier towns. The alternative, selling herself into a marriage of convenience or worse, made her stomach turn. "I have nowhere else to go," she admitted quietly, "and I cannot afford to be particular about my circumstances." Gabriel exchanged a look with the mercantile owner, then turned back to her. His expression was thoughtful, and she saw him worrying his lower lip with his teeth as if weighing a decision. Finally, he seemed to come to some conclusion. "Miss Warren, I know we just met, and you have got no reason to trust me. But it is getting on toward evening, and I do not like the thought of you walking to that boarding house alone, much less spending the night there by yourself before you have had a chance to see what you are dealing with." He rotated his hat in his hands, a gesture she realized was born of nervousness. "The ranch where I work, the Triple Creek, is owned by a widow named Mrs. Sarah Colton. She is a respectable lady, runs a tight operation. I am thinking she might be willing to put you up for the night, maybe even a few days while you get your bearings. I could talk to her, explain your situation." "I could not impose," Delilah started, but even as she said it, she felt a desperate hope rising in her chest. "It would not be an imposition," Gabriel said firmly. "Mrs. Colton has a kind heart, especially for women in difficult circumstances. And tomorrow, in the daylight, I can take you to the boarding house and help you assess what needs to be done. Maybe round up a few of the ranch hands to help with repairs if you need it." "Why would you do this for me?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "You do not know me at all." Gabriel met her eyes, and there was something in his gaze that made her breath catch. "Because your Aunt Clara showed me kindness when I needed it most. Because every person deserves a fair chance in this world, and because it is the right thing to do." He paused. "My mother, God rest her soul, she used to say that kindness is the only thing we can give freely that costs us nothing but means everything. I reckon she was right about that." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and Delilah found herself nodding before she had fully thought through the implications of accepting help from a stranger. But something in Gabriel Owens' steady presence made her feel safe for the first time since she had left Philadelphia. Perhaps it was foolish, perhaps she was being naive, but her instincts told her she could trust this cowboy with the kind eyes and the gentle voice. "I would be grateful for your help, Mr. Owens," she said softly. "Gabriel," he corrected with a slight smile. "If we are going to be helping you get settled, we might as well be on friendly terms." "Then you must call me Delilah," he nodded, and she thought she saw something warm flicker in those gray-blue eyes. "Well then, Delilah, let us get your belongings and head out to the Triple Creek before the sun sets. January nights in the Arizona Territory get cold enough to freeze water solid, and I would rather not be riding in the dark if we can help it." The mercantile owner offered to have his son repair the window and keep an eye out for any other trouble. Delilah retrieved her carpetbag from the corner where she had dropped it during the shooting, and Gabriel led her outside to where his horse, a sturdy bay gelding, was tied to the hitching post. The main street of Bisbee stretched before them, a collection of wood and adobe buildings clinging to the sides of steep hills. The town had grown rapidly with the copper mining boom, and it showed in the haphazard construction and the diverse crowd of people moving along the boardwalks. Miners still covered in red dust from the pits, businessmen in suits and bowler hats, Mexican families speaking rapid Spanish, Chinese laborers heading back to their section of town, and painted ladies lounging in the doorways of saloons even at this early hour. "It is a rough place," Gabriel said, following her gaze, "but it has got potential. The copper mines are bringing in money, and with money comes civilization eventually." Schools, churches, theaters. Give it a few years and Bisbee might even be respectable. He untied his horse and helped Delilah secure her carpet bag behind the saddle. Then he swung up into the saddle with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle and reached down to pull her up behind him. Delilah hesitated for just a moment, then grasped his hand and let him help her settle behind the saddle, her arms wrapping tentatively around his waist. She could feel the solid warmth of him through his shirt, the steady rhythm of his breathing, and she tried not to think about how improper this would be considered back in Philadelphia. "Hold on," Gabriel said, and she tightened her grip as he urged the horse forward. They rode through Bisbee and out into the desert beyond, following a well-worn trail that wound between rocky hills studded with mesquite and palo verde trees. The January sun was sinking toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed impossibly vivid after the gray winters of Pennsylvania. The air was crisp and cold, carrying the scent of sage and dust, and Delilah found herself acutely aware of every detail. The creak of leather, the rhythmic clip of the horse's hooves, the warmth of Gabriel's body against hers, the vast open sky stretching endlessly above them. "It is beautiful," she murmured, almost to herself. "It grows on you," Gabriel replied. "When I first came out here from Texas, I thought it was the most God-forsaken land I had ever seen. Nothing but rocks and thorns and things that bite or sting. But after a while, you start to see the beauty in it. The way the light changes throughout the day, the smell of the desert after a rain, the stars at night so thick you think you could reach up and touch them. It gets into your blood, this land, makes it hard to think about leaving." "What brought you here from Texas?" She felt him tense slightly, and she immediately regretted the question. "I am sorry, that was presumptuous of me. No, it is all right." He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was measured, careful. "My family had a ranch near San Antonio. Nothing fancy, just enough to get by, but we had a bad drought, lost most of the herd. My father, he took it hard, took to drinking, got into debt with some men who were not patient about repayment. One night they came to the ranch. There was a fight. My father was killed, and my younger brother, Thomas, he was shot trying to defend our mother. He was only 16. Delilah's arms tightened around him instinctively. "Gabriel, I am so sorry. I was 23, old enough to know I needed to get my mother somewhere safe. We sold what was left and I brought her to Tucson, got her set up with a boarding house of her own, similar to your aunt's place. She did well there for a while, made friends, seemed happy. But her health was never good after what happened. She passed 2 years ago, heart just gave out." "So you stayed in the territory?" "I did. Worked a few different ranches, saved my money, eventually ended up at the Triple Creek. Mrs. Colton, she lost her husband to a mining accident 5 years back, been running the ranch herself ever since. She needed someone who could handle the harder work, break the wild horses, manage the cattle drives to market. I needed a place where I could work hard enough to forget, at least for a while. It has been a good arrangement." They rode in silence for a while, and Delilah found herself thinking about the man whose steady heartbeat she could feel beneath her palms. He had suffered, lost his family, been forced to start over in a harsh and unforgiving land. Yet instead of becoming bitter or cruel, he had retained his kindness, his willingness to help a stranger. It spoke to a strength of character that she found deeply admirable. The Triple Creek Ranch came into view as they crested a low rise. It was more substantial than Delilah had expected. A main house built of adobe with a wide porch, surrounded by corrals, barns, and several smaller outbuildings. Smoke rose from the chimney, and she could see the warm glow of lamplight in the windows. Several horses moved in the corrals, and a few cattle grazed in a fenced pasture. It looked solid and well-maintained, a testament to hard work and careful management. Gabriel guided the horse toward the main house and dismounted, then helped Delilah down. Her legs were stiff from the ride and she stumbled slightly. His hand steadied her, warm through the fabric of her dress, and for a moment they stood very close, his face just inches from hers. She could see flecks of darker blue in his gray eyes, the small scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the way his breath made small clouds in the cold air. "Steady," he said softly, and there was something in his voice that made her pulse quicken. The door of the house opened, and a woman emerged onto the porch. She was perhaps 50, with steel gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She wore a practical wool dress and a shawl against the evening chill, and her expression was curious but not unfriendly. "Gabriel, I was not expecting you back until tomorrow," she said, her gaze moving to Delilah with obvious interest. "Mrs. Colton, I apologize for arriving unannounced." Gabriel kept a respectful distance, his hat once again in his hands. "This is Miss Delilah Warren. She arrived in Bisbee today from Philadelphia, just inherited Clara Warren's boarding house. There was some trouble in town, shooting over at the Mercantile, and I thought it best not to leave her alone at the boarding house tonight. I was hoping you might be willing to offer her hospitality for a night or two, just until she gets her bearings." Sarah Colton's expression softened immediately. "Clara Warren's niece. Oh, my dear, of course you must stay. Clara was a good friend of mine. We served on the church committee together. I was so sorry to hear of her passing." She came down the porch steps and took Delilah's hands in her own, which were work-roughened but warm. "You must be exhausted after your journey. Come inside, we will get you fed and settled." Relief flooded through Delilah so strongly that her eyes burned with unexpected tears. "Thank you, Mrs. Colton. I do not know what I would have done if Gabriel had not helped me." "Gabriel has a good heart," Sarah said, casting an approving look at the cowboy. "He is one of the finest men I have ever had the privilege to employ. Now, let us get you inside before you freeze. Gabriel, see to your horse and then come in for supper. I made enough stew for an army, as usual." The interior of the ranch house was warm and welcoming, with thick adobe walls that held the heat from a large fireplace. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a long wooden table, comfortable chairs, and shelves lined with books and practical items. It was a working household, clean but lived in, and Delilah felt some of the tension leave her shoulders as Sarah bustled about, ladling stew into bowls and slicing thick pieces of bread. Gabriel came in a few minutes later, having washed up at the pump outside. He had removed his vest and rolled up his sleeves, revealing muscular forearms, and his dark hair was damp where he had slicked it back. When he caught Delilah looking at him, he offered a small smile that made something flutter in her chest. Over supper, Sarah drew out Delilah's story with gentle questions. Delilah found herself talking more than she had intended, explaining about her life in Philadelphia, how she had been living with a distant cousin's family after her parents died of influenza 3 years ago. The cousin's wife had made it clear that Delilah was a burden, tolerated only because propriety demanded it. When the letter about the inheritance arrived, Delilah had seen it as her chance for independence, a life of her own making. "Clara never married, never had children of her own," Sarah said thoughtfully. "But she had a gift for taking care of people. That boarding house of hers was always full, and she treated her boarders like family. She would be glad to know her property went to someone who needed it." "I only hope I can live up to her example," Delilah said quietly. "Though I confess, I am somewhat daunted by the prospect. I have never run a boarding house before." "You will learn," Gabriel said. He had been mostly quiet during the meal, but now he leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Like I said earlier, I will take you there tomorrow, help you see what needs doing. Mrs. Colton, if you could spare a couple of the hands for a day or two, I think we could get the place in order quickly." "Of course," Sarah agreed. "Clara was my friend, and any niece of hers is welcome to all the help we can provide. Besides, it will be good to have that boarding house operational again. The town needs respectable lodging, especially with all the new people arriving for the mines." That night, Delilah slept in a small but comfortable guest room under thick quilts that kept out the desert cold. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch. The lowing of cattle, the distant yip of coyotes, the creak of the house settling. Her life had changed so dramatically in the course of a single day that she could barely process it. This morning, she had been alone and frightened in a dangerous town. Now she was lying in a warm bed, under the protection of kind strangers who had no reason to help her, except that it was the right thing to do. And then there was Gabriel Owens. She could not stop thinking about him, about the way he had appeared in the mercantile like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to form. The strength in his hands, the kindness in his eyes, the deep timbre of his voice. The way she had felt sitting behind him on the horse, her arms around his waist, trusting him completely even though they had only just met. It was foolish, she told herself. Dangerous to develop feelings for a man she barely knew. She needed to focus on establishing herself, making the boarding house profitable, creating a life of independence. Romance was a luxury she could not afford. But as she finally drifted off to sleep, it was Gabriel's face she saw in her mind, and the memory of his words. "Here, you will know kindness always." The next morning dawned clear and cold, the sun rising over the distant mountains in a blaze of gold and rose. Delilah woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon, and she dressed quickly in her second-best dress, a practical dark blue wool that would be suitable for inspecting a dusty boarding house. When she emerged into the main room, she found Sarah already up and cooking, while Gabriel sat at the table drinking coffee and studying a piece of paper. "Good morning," Sarah said cheerfully. "I hope you slept well. Breakfast is almost ready." "I slept very well, thank you." Delilah took the seat Sarah indicated and accepted a cup of coffee with gratitude. The brew was strong and hot, chasing away the last remnants of sleep. Gabriel looked up from his paper and smiled at her. "Morning, Delilah. I have been making a list of things we should check at the boarding house. Roof, windows, doors, the stove, the pump if there is one. We will want to make sure everything is sound before you start taking in boarders." The casual way he said, "We made something warm bloom in Delilah's chest." She had expected to face this challenge alone, but here was this man, this near stranger, including himself in her plans as if it were the most natural thing in the world. After a hearty breakfast, Gabriel saddled 2 horses, explaining that it would be easier if Delilah had her own mount rather than riding double again. He chose a gentle mare named Daisy, assuring Delilah that the horse was as steady as they came. Delilah had ridden occasionally in Philadelphia, sedate outings in the park, but never anything like navigating desert trails. Gabriel was patient, showing her how to hold the reins, how to use her knees to guide the horse, his large hands covering hers until she got the feel of it. "You are a natural," he said, and the approval in his voice made her sit a little straighter in the saddle. They set out for Bisbee as the sun climbed higher, warming the air but not dispelling the January chill entirely. 2 ranch hands rode with them, brothers named Tom and Frank who had worked for Sarah Colton for several years. They were friendly but respectful, tipping their hats to Delilah and calling her Madam in a way that made her feel both mature and slightly uncomfortable. She was only 22, hardly old enough to be Madam to men who were probably not much older than herself. The boarding house on Copper Road was worse than Delilah had feared. It was a 2-story wooden structure, the paint peeling and faded, several shutters hanging crooked. The front porch sagged alarmingly, and weeds had grown up around the foundation. Inside was equally disheartening. The main floor held a parlor, dining room, and kitchen, all covered in a thick layer of dust. The furniture was solid enough, but the curtains were faded and torn, the floors were filthy, and there was a pervasive smell of abandonment and decay. The second floor had 6 small bedrooms, each with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a washstand. These 2 were dusty and neglected, but the bones were good. Delilah could see, beneath the dirt and damage, the comfortable home her aunt had created. It just needed work, a tremendous amount of work. She stood in the middle of the parlor, fighting the urge to cry. The enormity of the task before her felt overwhelming. How could she possibly make this place habitable? Where would she even begin? Hey. Gabriel's voice was soft. He had come to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. I know it looks bad, but it is not hopeless. We will start with the basics. Get the place cleaned, fix what is broken, make it safe and comfortable. One step at a time. I do not even know where to start, she admitted, her voice wavering despite her best efforts to sound confident. That is what you have got me for. He touched her elbow gently, a brief contact that somehow steadied her. Tom and Frank can start on the porch and the shutters. I will check the roof and the chimney, make sure everything is sound. You can start deciding what furniture stays and what needs replacing, what you want to keep of your aunt's things and what you want to change. By the end of today, you will be able to see progress. I promise. Delilah looked up at him, at the calm certainty in his face, and felt something shift inside her. This man, who had every reason to focus on his own work and his own concerns, was devoting his time and energy to helping her. Not because he expected anything in return, but simply because it was the right thing to do, because he had promised her kindness, and he was a man who kept his word. "Thank you," she said, and the words felt inadequate for the gratitude she felt. "I do not know how I will ever repay you." "No repayment necessary." He smiled at her, and it transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. "Like I told you yesterday, your aunt helped me when I needed it. This is me passing that kindness forward. Besides," he added, his voice dropping to a more intimate tone, "I like helping you. You have got courage, coming all this way to make a new life for yourself. That is worth supporting." She felt heat rise in her cheeks and had to look away from the intensity in his eyes. "I will do my best to be worthy of your faith in me. You already are." They worked all day, and true to Gabriel's word, progress became visible. Tom and Frank repaired the porch and fixed the shutters, their hammering and sawing filling the air with purposeful noise. Gabriel climbed onto the roof, patched several holes, and cleaned out the chimney so that they could safely light a fire in the parlor fireplace. Delilah threw herself into cleaning, attacking the dust and grime with fierce determination. She swept and scrubbed, washed windows, beat the dust from curtains and cushions. Her hands grew red and raw, her back ached, and her dress became filthy, but she did not stop. As the sun began to set, Gabriel lit a fire in the parlor fireplace, and they all stood back to assess the day's work. The transformation was remarkable. The boarding house was still shabby, still in need of paint and new curtains and a dozen other improvements, but it was clean and functional. The porch no longer sagged, the windows were clear, and the fire crackled cheerfully in the hearth. It looked, Delilah thought with a surge of emotion, like a home. "Tomorrow we will tackle the kitchen," Gabriel said, wiping soot from his hands. "The stove needs work and we should check the pump. But you have got a solid foundation here, Delilah. Another few days and you could start advertising for boarders." "I cannot thank you enough," Delilah said, looking at Gabriel and the two ranch hands. "All of you. This would have taken me weeks on my own if I could have managed it at all." Tom and Frank tipped their hats and headed for their horses, promising to return the next day. Gabriel lingered, banking the fire and making sure the house was secure. Delilah watched him move around the space, his presence making the rooms feel safer, more welcoming. The thought of him leaving, of spending the night alone in this big, empty house in a part of town he himself had called dangerous, made her stomach clench with anxiety. "You are not staying here tonight, are you?" Gabriel asked, voicing her own concern. "It is not safe yet, not until you have got some boarders and more of a presence. Come back to the ranch with me. Mrs. Colton would not mind, and I would rest easier knowing you were not alone here." Delilah wanted to argue, to insist that she could take care of herself, that she did not need to be coddled. But the truth was, she was frightened. The house was isolated at the end of Copper Road, and as darkness fell, she could hear the rowdy sounds of the miners returning from their shifts, the shouts and laughter and occasional gunshots that seemed to be a regular feature of Bisbee's evenings. "I hate to impose on Mrs. Colton's hospitality again," she said weakly. "You are not imposing. She told me this morning that she enjoys having another woman around the place, someone to talk to besides rough cowboys and ranch hands." He collected his hat and coat, then turned to her with an expression that was both serious and gentle. "Delilah, you do not have to prove anything by putting yourself in danger. There is no shame in accepting help until you are ready to stand on your own." His words struck something deep inside her, a knot of pride and fear that she had been carrying since she left Philadelphia. He was right. She did not have to prove her worth by suffering alone. Accepting help was not weakness, it was wisdom. "All right," she agreed. "I will come back to the ranch. But Gabriel, I do need to start standing on my own soon. I cannot keep taking advantage of your kindness and Mrs. Colton's generosity indefinitely." "We will get you there," he promised. "One step at a time." The ride back to the Triple Creek felt different than the previous day's journey. Delilah was more comfortable on Daisy now, more confident in the saddle, and she found herself riding alongside Gabriel rather than feeling like she was struggling to keep up. They talked as they rode, about small things at first, the weather, the landscape, the horses, but gradually the conversation deepened. Gabriel told her about breaking wild horses, about the satisfaction of earning the trust of an animal that had every reason to fear humans. He talked about the cattle drives, the long days in the saddle pushing the herd to market, the camaraderie of the cowboys around the campfire at night. He spoke of the desert with a reverence that surprised her, describing the way a storm could roll across the mountains, the way the saguaro cacti stood like sentinels in the fading light, the perfect quiet of the wilderness at dawn. In turn, Delilah told him about Philadelphia, about the life she had left behind. She talked about her parents, how her father had been a clerk, and her mother had taken in sewing to make ends meet. How they had worked so hard to give her an education, to teach her to read and write and cipher. How their deaths had left her adrift, dependent on relatives who resented her presence. She talked about the books she loved to read, about her dream of having a place of her own where she could be useful and valued. "You will have that," Gabriel said with quiet conviction. "I can already see it. You have got the determination and the heart for it. A few months from now, that boarding house is going to be the best in Bisbee, and people will be lining up to rent your rooms. I hope you are right." She paused, then asked the question that had been nagging at her. "Gabriel, why have you not started a ranch of your own? You clearly know the work and you have been saving money. Why work for someone else when you could be your own boss?" He was quiet for a long moment, and she worried she had overstepped. But finally he spoke, his voice thoughtful. "I have thought about it, but starting a ranch requires capital, more than I have got saved. You need land, cattle, horses, equipment, buildings. And you need luck, which I am not sure I trust after what happened to my family in Texas. Working for Mrs. Colton is steady. I know where my next meal is coming from. I have got a roof over my head, and I do not have to lie awake at night worrying about droughts or diseases or cattle rustlers. Maybe that makes me a coward, but I have seen what happens when dreams go bad, and I am not eager to repeat that." "That does not make you a coward," Delilah said firmly. "It makes you wise. There is no shame in choosing security over risk, especially when you have already lost so much." He glanced at her, something warm and grateful in his expression. "You understand, then?" "I do, more than you might think. Coming here was the biggest risk I have ever taken. Most days I am terrified I am going to fail, that I am going to end up worse off than I started. But I did not have a choice, not really. Staying in Philadelphia was not an option. So I am making the best of what I have got and hoping it will be enough." "It will be," Gabriel said. "You are stronger than you think, Delilah Warren." Over the next week, a routine developed. Each morning, Gabriel would arrive at the ranch house before dawn, and he and Delilah would ride to the boarding house together. Mrs. Colton had graciously allowed her to continue staying at the Triple Creek, and had even contributed some spare furniture and linens for the boarding house. Tom and Frank came when they could be spared from ranch work, and gradually the boarding house was transformed. They repaired the kitchen stove, replaced broken floorboards, patched and painted walls. Delilah sewed new curtains from fabric Gabriel helped her purchase in town, her fingers flying over the needle in the lamplight each evening. She scrubbed and polished until the old furniture gleamed. She organized the bedrooms, making each one as welcoming as she could with fresh linens and a few small touches. A mirror on the wall, a hook for hanging clothes, a wash basin and pitcher decorated with a simple pattern of blue flowers. As they worked side by side, Delilah found herself growing more comfortable with Gabriel, more attuned to his presence. She learned to read his moods, to recognize the slight tightening around his eyes when his back was hurting from hard labor, the way his jaw clenched when he was concentrating on a difficult task. She noticed how gentle his hands were despite their strength, how careful he was with her, always making sure she did not lift anything too heavy or climb too high on a ladder. And she noticed the way he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she was not paying attention. There was something in his gaze, something warm and intense that made her heart skip. She found herself thinking about him constantly, looking forward to their morning rides, to the easy conversation they shared over lunch, to the comfortable silence that fell between them as they worked. She caught herself watching him, admiring the play of muscles beneath his shirt as he hammered or lifted or reached for something high on a shelf. It was dangerous, she knew. She was in no position to be developing romantic feelings for anyone. She needed to focus on establishing her business, on becoming self-sufficient. Getting involved with a man, particularly a man as good and kind as Gabriel, felt like a distraction she could not afford. What if it did not work out? What if she was misreading his kindness for something more? What if he saw her as a responsibility, a promise he had made to her aunt, rather than as a woman he might genuinely care for? But her heart seemed to have its own ideas, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore the way she felt when Gabriel smiled at her, or the warmth that flooded through her when his hand accidentally brushed hers as they worked. One afternoon, about 10 days after Delilah's arrival in Bisbee, they were working in the dining room. She was standing on a chair, trying to hang new curtains, and Gabriel was holding the chair steady. The fabric was heavier than she had anticipated, and she was stretching to reach the curtain rod, balanced precariously on her toes. "Careful," Gabriel warned, his hands firm on the chair. "Maybe I should do that. You are going to fall." "I have almost got it," Delilah insisted, reaching further. Her fingertips brushed the rod, and she lunged just a bit more, trying to hook the curtain in place. The chair wobbled and she gasped, losing her balance. Gabriel caught her before she hit the ground, his arms coming around her waist and pulling her against his chest. For a moment they stood frozen, her feet dangling above the floor, her hands clutching his shoulders, their faces inches apart. She could feel the rapid beat of his heart against her own, could see the way his pupils dilated as he looked at her. His breath was warm on her face and his arms were solid and strong around her. "Are you all right?" His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. "Yes," she breathed. "Thank you for catching me, always." The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. His gaze dropped to her lips, and she saw him swallow hard. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her, and her entire body seemed to thrum with anticipation. But then he gently set her on her feet and stepped back, releasing her so quickly that she swayed and had to catch herself on the back of a chair. "I will hang the curtains," he said, his voice more normal now, though there was still a slight rasp to it. "You can tell me if they are hanging straight." Delilah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Her heart was hammering, her skin tingling where his hands had been. That had not been her imagination. There was something between them, something real and powerful. The question was what, if anything, she should do about it. That evening, back at the Triple Creek, Sarah Colton invited Delilah to sit with her on the porch after supper. The older woman brought out 2 shawls and a pot of tea, and they settled into the comfortable rocking chairs, watching the stars begin to emerge in the darkening sky. "The boarding house is coming along beautifully," Sarah said after a few minutes of companionable silence. "Gabriel tells me you should be ready to start taking in boarders within the week." "I hope so," Delilah said. "I need to start generating income soon. I have imposed on your hospitality far too long already." "Nonsense. I have enjoyed having you here." Sarah sipped her tea, then turned to look at Delilah with those sharp, knowing eyes. "But I suspect you are eager to begin your independent life. It is a good thing, for a woman to have her own means, her own place in the world. I admired your Aunt Clara for that. She never let anyone tell her she could not do something just because she was a woman." "I hope to follow her example," Delilah said softly. "I think you will." Sarah rocked gently, her gaze returning to the horizon. "Gabriel has been a great help to you, I understand. He has been wonderful. I could not have managed any of this without him." Delilah felt heat rise in her cheeks and was grateful for the gathering darkness. "He is a good man." "He is one of the best men I know," Sarah agreed. "He has had a hard life, lost a great deal. It has made him cautious about opening his heart again. But I have seen the way he looks at you, my dear, and I have seen the way you look at him. I am old enough to recognize when 2 people are falling in love, whether they have admitted it to themselves or not." Delilah's breath caught. "I do not know what you mean." "Do not you?" Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. "Delilah, I am not trying to pry or to make you uncomfortable. I just want you to know that if something were to develop between you and Gabriel, I would be nothing but pleased. He deserves happiness, and so do you. Do not let fear or pride or the need to prove your independence stop you from reaching for something good." What if it does not work out? Delilah whispered, voicing her deepest fear. What if I am misreading everything? What if he is just being kind, helping me because of his debt to my aunt? Then you will survive and move forward, just as you have survived everything else life has thrown at you, Sarah said practically. But I do not think you are misreading anything. I have known Gabriel for 3 years, and I have never seen him devote so much time and attention to anyone. He leaves the ranch before dawn and does not come back until after dark, spending every spare moment helping you. That is not obligation, my dear. That is a man who wants to be near the woman he cares for. Delilah's heart soared at the words, even as her practical mind tried to rein in her hopes. I do care for him, she admitted quietly. More than I probably should, given how short a time we have known each other. But I am afraid, Mrs. Colton. I am afraid of needing someone, of depending on them and then having them taken away. I have already lost my parents, been rejected by my relatives. I cannot bear the thought of opening my heart only to have it broken again. That is the risk we all take when we love, Sarah said gently. But the alternative is living a half-life, safe but lonely. I loved my husband with everything I had, and when he died, I thought I would die too. The pain was unbearable, but I would not trade a single moment of the time we had together, not for all the safety in the world. Love is worth the risk, Delilah. Always. They sat in silence for a while longer, and Delilah thought about Sarah's words. The older woman was right, she realized. She had been so focused on protecting herself, on maintaining her independence, that she had been pushing away the very thing she wanted most: connection, belonging, love. Gabriel had offered her kindness from the first moment they met, had given her his time and energy and care without asking for anything in return. He had made her feel safe and valued and seen in a way she never had before. Was she really going to throw that away because she was afraid? The next day was Sunday, and Mrs. Colton invited Delilah to attend church services in Bisbee. Gabriel drove them in the ranch wagon, looking uncomfortable in a clean shirt and his best vest, his hair slicked back and his jaw freshly shaved. Delilah wore her Sunday dress, a deep green wool that brought out the auburn highlights in her hair, and she noticed the way Gabriel's eyes lingered on her when he helped her into the wagon. The church was a simple wooden building on the edge of town, but it was packed with people from all walks of life. Miners and their families sat alongside merchants and ranchers. Mexican women in colorful shawls knelt in prayer beside respectable matrons in their Eastern fashions. The minister was a young man with earnest eyes and a booming voice, and he preached about kindness, about treating others as you would want to be treated, about building a community based on mutual respect and support. Delilah found her eyes drifting to Gabriel, who sat beside her in the pew. His attention was on the sermon, but she noticed the way his hand rested on the bench between them, close enough that she could touch it if she dared. His fingers were long and strong, the nails clean but the knuckles scarred from hard work. She remembered how those hands had caught her when she fell, how gentle they had been despite their strength. Almost without conscious thought, she shifted her hand closer to his. Their fingers brushed, and she felt a jolt of electricity run through her. Gabriel went very still. Then slowly, deliberately, he turned his hand palm up in an unspoken invitation. Delilah's heart hammered as she slipped her hand into his, feeling his fingers close around hers in a warm, firm grip. It was a simple gesture, but it felt momentous, like they were acknowledging something that had been building between them for days. Neither of them let go throughout the rest of the service. After church, several members of the congregation came over to greet them. They had heard about Clara Warren's niece, and they were curious to meet her and to inquire about the boarding house. Delilah found herself giving an impromptu advertisement for the business, explaining that she would be opening for boarders in just a few days. Several men expressed interest, saying they were tired of sleeping six to a room in the cramped miners' barracks and would welcome cleaner, quieter accommodations. Gabriel stood by her side the whole time, his presence lending her confidence. When one miner got a bit too enthusiastic in his interest, stepping too close and asking personal questions, Gabriel simply moved between them, his expression polite but his meaning clear. The miner backed off immediately, tipping his hat and retreating. "Thank you," Delilah murmured as they walked back to the wagon. "Any time." Gabriel's hand found the small of her back, a light touch that nevertheless sent warmth spreading through her. "You handled that well, by the way. You are a natural businesswoman." By the time they returned to the ranch, Delilah had commitments from 3 potential boarders, all of whom had agreed to come by the boarding house on Tuesday to inspect the rooms and discuss terms. It was more than she had dared hope for, and she felt a surge of excitement mixed with terror. This was really happening. She was going to be a boarding house proprietress, just like her aunt. That evening, Gabriel asked if she would like to take a walk with him before supper. Sarah gave them both a knowing smile and shooed them out the door, saying she would keep the food warm. They walked away from the ranch house, following a path that led up into the low hills behind the property. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and the air was cool but not unpleasantly so. "I wanted to talk to you," Gabriel said when they were out of earshot of the house. He sounded nervous, and Delilah's heart began to race. "About what happens next?" "What do you mean?" He stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious in the fading light. "You are going to open the boarding house this week. You are going to have boarders' responsibilities. You will not need my help anymore, not the way you have these past 2 weeks." "I will always appreciate your help," Delilah said carefully. "You have done so much for me, Gabriel. I could never have managed without you. I know, and I have been glad to do it." He took a breath, seeming to steel himself. "But Delilah, I need you to understand something. I did not help you just because of some debt to your aunt or because I felt sorry for you. I helped you because from the moment I saw you in that mercantile, covered in flour dust and scared but trying so hard to be brave, I felt something I have not felt in years. You made me want to be better, to do more. You made me think about the future in a way I have not since my family died." Delilah's throat tightened with emotion. "Gabriel, let me finish, please." His hands came up to cup her face, his touch achingly gentle. "These past 2 weeks, working alongside you, getting to know you, watching you transform that boarding house through sheer determination and hard work, I have fallen in love with you. I know it is fast. I know we have not known each other long, but I am sure of what I feel. You are brave and strong and kind, and when I am with you, the world makes sense in a way it has not in a very long time." Tears spilled down Delilah's cheeks, and Gabriel's thumbs gently brushed them away. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have been trying not to, trying to focus on being independent and proving I could manage on my own. But I cannot stop thinking about you. I cannot stop wanting to be near you. When you caught me yesterday, I thought my heart might burst out of my chest." Gabriel laughed, a sound of pure relief and joy. "So what do we do now?" "I do not know," Delilah admitted. "I still need to make the boarding house work. I still need to prove to myself that I can stand on my own 2 feet. "I am not asking you to give that up," Gabriel said quickly. "Your independence is important, and I respect that. I would never want you to feel like you were trading one form of dependence for another. But maybe we could figure this out together. Maybe independence does not have to mean being alone. Maybe it means choosing who you want beside you, on your own terms." The wisdom in his words struck her deeply. He was right. True independence was not about refusing help or isolating herself. It was about making her own choices, building her own life, and deciding for herself who she wanted to share it with. And she wanted Gabriel. She wanted him with a certainty that went bone deep. "I would like that," she said softly. "I would like to build a life with you, Gabriel. If you are willing to be patient with me while I find my footing." "I would wait forever for you," he said, and then he was kissing her, his lips warm and soft against hers. It was a gentle kiss at first, tentative and sweet, but it deepened as she wrapped her arms around his neck and pressed closer to him. His arms came around her waist, pulling her tight against him, and she felt like she was melting, like every part of her was coming alive under his touch. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Gabriel rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that since the day I met you," he admitted. "So have I," she confessed, and felt him smile against her skin. They walked back to the ranch house hand in hand, and when they entered, Sarah took one look at their faces and started laughing. "Well, it is about time," she said, pulling them both into a warm embrace. "I was beginning to think I was going to have to lock you two in a room together to make you admit your feelings." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Gabriel continued to help Delilah prepare the boarding house, but now there was an added dimension to their interactions. Stolen kisses in the kitchen when Tom and Frank were not looking. The brush of hands as they passed each other in the hallway. Lingering glances across the dining room. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once, this new intimacy between them. On Tuesday, the 3 potential boarders came to inspect the house. They were all minors, tough men with calloused hands and guarded expressions, but they were respectful to Delilah and clearly impressed by what she had done with the place. They agreed to her terms, which included 2 meals a day, clean linens once a week, and strict rules about noise, drinking, and bringing women into the boarding house. Delilah had worried about enforcing such rules, but Gabriel had assured her that any man who did not like them could find other lodgings. By the end of the week, Delilah had 5 boarders and a waiting list of 2 more. The boarding house was officially in business, and the income from the rent meant she could start paying back Mrs. Colton for the supplies and support she had provided. More than that, it meant Delilah had achieved what she had come to Arizona to do. She had established herself as an independent businesswoman with her own source of income and her own place in the community. Gabriel was immensely proud of her, and he told her so constantly. But as the boarding house filled with people, their private time together dwindled. Delilah was busy from dawn to dusk, cooking meals for her boarders, cleaning rooms, managing supplies, dealing with small disputes and requests. Gabriel still came by when he could, but his work at the Triple Creek demanded his attention as well. Mrs. Colton had been patient about his absences, but calving season was approaching, and she needed him back at the ranch full-time. One evening, about a month after the boarding house opened, Gabriel came by after supper. The boarders were all out, either at the saloons or visiting friends, and Delilah was alone in the kitchen, washing dishes. She heard his knock and opened the door with a smile that faded when she saw his expression. "What is wrong?" she asked immediately. "Nothing is wrong exactly." He came inside, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair. "I just need to talk to you about something, and I am not sure how you are going to take it." Delilah's stomach clenched with anxiety, but she gestured him to the table and poured them both coffee. "Tell me." Gabriel wrapped his hands around the mug, staring down into the dark liquid. "Mrs. Colton offered me a partnership in the ranch," he said finally. "She wants to expand the operation, maybe buy some of the land adjacent to her property. But she is getting older, and she does not have anyone to leave the ranch to. She is proposing that I buy in, become a part owner, and eventually take over the whole operation when she retires. Delilah's heart leaped. Gabriel, that is wonderful. That is everything you have wanted, a chance to have your own place. It is, he agreed, but it is also a huge commitment. I would need to invest most of my savings to buy in, and I would be tied to the Triple Creek for years, maybe the rest of my life. I could not leave, could not follow you if you decided to go somewhere else, could not adapt if circumstances changed. Why would I go somewhere else? Delilah asked, confused. My boarding house is here. My life is here now. Gabriel looked up at her, and his eyes were filled with a vulnerability that made her chest ache. I know things have been good between us, Delilah. These past weeks have been the happiest of my life. But we have only known each other a few months. We have not talked about the future, about what we both want in the long term. Before I commit everything I have to this ranch, I need to know if you see a future for us. Together. Delilah set down her coffee mug and reached across the table to take his hands. Gabriel Owens, are you asking me if I plan to stay in Bisbee? I am asking if you can see yourself building a life here, with me. His fingers tightened around hers. I love you, Delilah. I want to marry you if you will have me. I want to wake up next to you every morning and come home to you every night. I want to help you run this boarding house and build the Triple Creek into something we can be proud of. I want children with you, a family. I want to grow old with you. But I will not ask you to give up your independence or your dreams. If that is not what you want, if you need more time or more freedom, I will understand. I just need to know before I make this commitment to Mrs. Colton. Tears were streaming down Delilah's face, but she was smiling through them. Yes, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Yes to all of it. I want to marry you, Gabriel. I want to build a life with you here in Bisbee. I want a family and a future and everything we can create together. I have never been more sure of anything in my life. The relief and joy that flooded Gabriel's face was almost painful to witness. He stood up so quickly, his chair scraped loudly on the floor, and he came around the table to pull her into his arms. He kissed her deeply, possessively, his hands cradling her face as if she were something infinitely precious. When they finally broke apart, both of them were laughing and crying at the same time. When? Delilah asked breathlessly. When do you want to get married? As soon as possible, Gabriel said without hesitation. Tomorrow, if the minister will have us. I have waited my whole life to find someone like you, and I do not want to wait a moment longer than necessary. They decided on 2 weeks, time enough to make proper arrangements, but not so long that they would drive themselves mad with anticipation. Sarah Colton was thrilled by the news and immediately began planning a wedding celebration at the ranch. The church ladies got involved, and before Delilah knew what was happening, the entire town seemed to be preparing for the event. It was both overwhelming and deeply touching, this outpouring of support from a community she had known for only a few months. Delilah wrote letters to her relatives in Philadelphia, informing them of her engagement. She did not expect them to attend, given the distance and expense, and she was not disappointed when they sent back perfunctory congratulations and nothing more. But it did not matter. She had found her true family here in Arizona. Sarah Colton, the church ladies, even some of her boarders who had become friendly and protective of her. And most importantly, she had Gabriel. The wedding took place on a bright morning in late March 1884, when the desert was bursting with wildflowers after the winter rains. The ceremony was held in the church where Delilah and Gabriel had first held hands, and the building was packed with well-wishers. Delilah wore a simple but elegant dress that Sarah and the other women had helped her sew. a soft ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Gabriel wore a new suit, purchased specially for the occasion, and he looked so handsome that Delilah's breath caught when she saw him waiting for her at the altar. As she walked down the aisle, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. The fear and uncertainty of leaving Philadelphia, the gunshot that had sent her diving behind a flour barrel, the cowboy who had appeared like an answer to a prayer and promised her kindness. She thought about the weeks of hard work transforming the boarding house, the growing affection between her and Gabriel, the moment he had told her he loved her. Every step had led to this moment, to this man, to this new life she was choosing for herself. When the minister asked if she took Gabriel to be her husband, she said, "I do," in a voice that rang clear and strong through the church. And when Gabriel slipped a simple gold band onto her finger and kissed her as his wife, she felt a sense of rightness and belonging that she had never experienced before. This was home. He was home. The celebration at the Triple Creek lasted well into the evening, with food and music and dancing. Gabriel refused to leave Delilah's side, his arm always around her waist, his eyes constantly finding hers across the room. When they finally left for the small cabin on the ranch property that Mrs. Colton had given them as a wedding present, Gabriel carried Delilah over the threshold, making her laugh at the traditional gesture. Inside, a fire crackled in the hearth, and candles cast a warm glow over the simple but comfortable furnishings. Gabriel set Delilah on her feet and then just stood there, looking at her with such love and desire that she felt her cheeks heat. "You are so beautiful," he said softly. "I cannot believe you are my wife." "I cannot believe you are my husband," she replied, reaching up to touch his face. "I cannot believe how lucky I am." He turned his head to kiss her palm, his eyes never leaving hers. "I am the lucky one. You took a chance on a cowboy with nothing to offer but hard work and a good heart. You could have chosen anyone, but you chose me." "You are everything I need," Delilah said simply. "You showed me kindness when I expected cruelty. You gave me strength when I felt weak. You loved me without asking me to be anything other than myself. How could I not choose you?" They came together in a kiss that was both tender and passionate, the culmination of weeks of restrained desire. Gabriel was gentle with her, patient and careful, making sure she felt safe and cherished every moment. And when they finally came together as husband and wife, it was perfect, a physical expression of the love and commitment they had pledged to each other. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the big bed, Delilah's head on Gabriel's chest, his arms wrapped securely around her. She listened to the steady beat of his heart and felt a contentment so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "Happy," Gabriel murmured, his lips against her hair. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she whispered back. The years that followed were not without challenges, but they faced them together. The boarding house continued to thrive, and Delilah became known throughout Bisbee as a fair and capable businesswoman. Gabriel's partnership with Mrs. Colton transformed the Triple Creek into one of the most successful ranches in the territory. They worked hard, both of them, but they always made time for each other, always came home to each other at the end of the day. A year and a half after their wedding, in the autumn of 1885, Delilah gave birth to their first child, a healthy boy with his father's gray-blue eyes and his mother's auburn hair. They named him Thomas Gabriel Owens, after Gabriel's younger brother who had died defending their family. Gabriel cried when he held his son for the first time, overwhelmed by the love he felt for this tiny, perfect person. Delilah hired a woman to help manage the boarding house so she could spend more time with her baby and with Gabriel. She discovered that motherhood suited her, though it was more exhausting than any work she had ever done. Gabriel was a devoted father, coming home from the ranch whenever he could to hold his son, to sing to him, to walk the floor with him when he was fussy. Watching Gabriel with Thomas made Delilah fall in love with her husband all over again. When Thomas was 2, Delilah became pregnant again, this time with twin girls. The pregnancy was difficult, and the birth was long and frightening. Gabriel did not leave her side, holding her hand, wiping her brow, whispering encouragement and love. When the twins finally arrived, tiny but healthy, Gabriel looked at his 3 children and his exhausted but triumphant wife and said, "You have given me everything I ever wanted and more than I deserved." They named the girls Clara Sarah, after Delilah's aunt and Mrs. Colton, and Grace Elizabeth, after Gabriel's mother. The cabin on the ranch grew too small for their expanding family, and Gabriel built them a larger house, working on it in every spare moment he had. It was a beautiful home, solid and well-crafted, with a wide porch and enough bedrooms for all the children and guests. Delilah filled it with love and laughter, with the smell of fresh bread baking and the sound of children playing. Mrs. Colton eventually retired fully from managing the ranch, deeding her share entirely to Gabriel, and moving into a small house in town where she could be near the church and her friends. But she remained a fixture in their lives, visiting often to spoil her honorary grandchildren and offer wisdom when it was needed. The boarding house continued to operate successfully, eventually managed entirely by the woman Delilah had hired, with Delilah maintaining ownership, but focusing most of her energy on her family. As the children grew, Gabriel taught Thomas how to ride and rope, how to care for horses and read the weather. Delilah taught all 3 children to read and write, determined that they would have the education she had worked so hard to obtain. The girls proved as capable on horseback as their brother, and Gabriel was immensely proud of all of them. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Gabriel took Delilah back to the spot where he had first kissed her, up in the hills behind what was now their home. They stood together, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson, and Gabriel pulled her into his arms. "You remember what I said to you the first night we met?" he asked. "You said a lot of things that night," Delilah teased, though she knew exactly what he was referring to. "I promised you that you would know kindness always," Gabriel said, his voice serious now. "I promised that you would not face cruelty or coldness alone. Have I kept that promise?" Delilah turned in his arms to face him fully, her hands coming up to frame his beloved face. The years had added lines around his eyes and threads of silver in his dark hair, but to her, he was as handsome as the day she had first seen him in the mercantile. "You have kept that promise every single day," she said softly. "You have shown me more kindness, more love, more devotion than I ever dreamed possible. You have given me a home, a family, a life beyond anything I could have imagined when I stepped off that stage in Bisbee. You are my heart, Gabriel Owens, and I thank God every day that you were in that mercantile when I needed you most." "I was the one who needed you," Gabriel said, his voice rough with emotion. "You gave me a reason to hope again, to dream again. You gave me a family and a purpose, and a love that makes every day worth living. I would go through everything I lost, all the pain and heartbreak, 1,000 times over if it meant ending up here with you." They kissed as the sun set behind them, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. And as they walked back down the hill hand in hand, toward the home where their children were waiting, Delilah thought about the scared young woman she had been, arriving in a rough frontier town with nothing but a carpetbag and a desperate hope for a better future. That woman had expected cruelty in the cold reality of the Wild West. Instead, she had found a cowboy who promised her kindness always, and who had spent every day of their life together keeping that promise. She had found love, belonging, purpose, and joy. She had found home. Years continued to pass, marked by the steady rhythm of ranch life and the growing up of their children. Thomas grew into a young man who was the image of his father, tall and strong with a gift for working with horses. The twins, Clara and Grace, were bright and spirited, refusing to be confined by the expectations of what young ladies should be. They could ride as well as any cowboy, shoot straight, and also sew beautiful quilts and bake perfect pies. Delilah and Gabriel were proud of all of them. The boarding house eventually sold to a young couple from Denver who wanted to try their fortunes in Bisbee. Delilah used the proceeds to invest in expanding the ranch and to put money aside for the children's futures. Gabriel's reputation as a fair and skilled rancher spread throughout the territory, and the Triple Creek became one of the most respected operations in southern Arizona. But more than the material success, more than the thriving business or the beautiful home or the respect of the community, what mattered most to both Delilah and Gabriel was the love they shared. Through good years and hard years, through droughts and abundance, through the challenges of raising children and the inevitable conflicts that came with sharing a life, they remained devoted to each other. They made it a habit to sit together on the porch every evening after the work was done, holding hands and watching the sun set over the desert they both loved. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing their hopes and fears, their triumphs and disappointments, always supporting each other, always choosing each other. When Thomas was 20 and the twins were 18, Gabriel and Delilah sat them down and told them the story of how they had met. They told them about the gunshot in the mercantile, about Gabriel's promise of kindness, about the weeks of working together to restore the boarding house. They talked about falling in love, about taking chances, about building a life on trust and mutual respect and devotion. "That is what I want you to remember," Gabriel said, looking at each of his children in turn. "Life is going to be hard sometimes. There will be moments when you feel lost or scared or overwhelmed. But if you find someone who shows you kindness, who sees your worth and values your dreams, who stands beside you when things are difficult instead of running away, hold on to that person. That is the kind of love worth having." "Your father promised me I would know kindness always," Delilah added, her hand finding Gabriel's as it always did. "And he has kept that promise for more than 20 years. That is the foundation of everything we have built together. Kindness, respect, and an unwavering commitment to each other's happiness. If you can find that, if you can be that for someone else, you will have a good life." The children took those words to heart. Thomas eventually married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property, and the wedding was a joyful affair that reminded Gabriel and Delilah of their own celebration years earlier. Clara married a teacher who had come to Bisbee to establish a proper school, and Grace fell in love with a veterinarian who brought modern animal care practices to the region. Gabriel and Delilah welcomed all of their children's spouses with open arms, seeing in each of them the kindness and character they had taught their children to value. Grandchildren followed, filling the big house with noise and laughter once again. Gabriel proved to be as devoted a grandfather as he had been a father, spending hours teaching the little ones to ride, telling them stories, sneaking them sweets when Delilah was not looking. Delilah reveled in having babies in the house again, in the opportunity to watch Gabriel hold a sleeping infant with the same tenderness he had shown their own children. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. The house was packed with children, grandchildren, friends, and neighbors, all of whom had come to honor the couple who had become pillars of the community. There were speeches and toasts, music and dancing, and enough food to feed half of Bisbee. At one point, Gabriel pulled Delilah away from the crowd, leading her out to the porch where they could have a moment of relative quiet. The party continued inside, but out here, they could hear the familiar sounds of the desert at night, the chirp of crickets, the distant howl of a coyote, the soft rustle of wind through the mesquite trees. 30 years, Gabriel mused, his arm around Delilah's shoulders. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I saw you covered in flour, looking scared but determined. Other times it feels like I have known you my whole life. I feel the same, Delilah said, leaning into his warmth. They were both in their 50s now, their hair more gray than not, their bodies bearing the marks of years of hard work. But when Gabriel looked at her, she still saw the same love and devotion in his eyes that had been there when they were young. I think about that girl I was, stepping off the stage in Bisbee with nothing but hope and determination. I wish I could tell her not to be so afraid, that everything was going to work out better than she could possibly imagine. She would not have believed you, Gabriel said with a soft laugh. She was too practical, too convinced that life was going to be hard and happiness was something other people got to have. You taught me different, Delilah said, turning to look up at him. You taught me that happiness was something we could create together, through kindness and love and choosing each other every day. You taught me that I did not have to face the world alone, that partnership did not mean losing my independence, but rather gaining strength. You gave me everything, Gabriel. You gave me everything, he countered. A home, a family, a reason to believe in good things again. You took my broken heart and made it whole. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Delilah Owens. They kissed under the stars, two people who had built a life of love and purpose, who had weathered every storm together and emerged stronger. Inside, they could hear the party continuing, their children's laughter, their grandchildren's shrieks of joy. This was their legacy, Gabriel thought. Not just the ranch or the success they had achieved, but this family, this community of love they had created together. As they grew older, Gabriel and Delilah gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, turning more responsibility over to Thomas and his wife. They remained involved, offering advice and assistance when needed, but they also took time to enjoy the fruits of their labor. They took trips to Tucson and Phoenix, seeing how much the territory had changed and grown. They read books together on the porch, took long rides through the desert, and spoiled their grandchildren outrageously. Gabriel's health began to decline in his late 60s, his body finally showing the effects of a lifetime of hard physical labor. There were days when his back hurt too much to ride, when his joints ached with the cold. Delilah tended to him with the same devotion he had always shown her, making sure he took his medicine, rubbing salve into his sore muscles, sitting with him when the pain was bad. He hated being dependent, hated feeling weak, but she reminded him gently that this was what partnership meant, taking care of each other in good times and bad. You promised me kindness always, she would say, her hands gentle on his shoulders. And you have given it to me every day of our marriage. Now let me give it back to you. Let me take care of you the way you have always taken care of me. And Gabriel, who had spent his life being strong for others, finally learned to let himself be vulnerable, to accept help and love and care. It was a gift, he realized, to be so completely known and loved by another person, to trust them with your weaknesses as well as your strengths. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The family had grown large and prosperous. The ranch was thriving, and Bisbee itself had transformed from a rough mining town into a more civilized community with schools, churches, theaters, and paved streets. So much had changed since that January day in 1884 when a frightened young woman had stepped off a stage and into a new life. But some things remained constant. The vast desert sky, the red rocks of the mountains, the rhythm of ranch life, and most importantly, the love between Gabriel and Delilah. It had been tested by time and trial, by hardship and loss, but it had never wavered. They had chosen each other in youth, and they continued to choose each other every day of their lives. Gabriel lived to the age of 71, passing peacefully in his sleep with Delilah beside him, her hand in his as it had been for nearly half a century. The entire community mourned his loss, and the church was packed for his funeral. People spoke of his kindness, his integrity, his skill as a rancher, and his devotion as a husband and father. But what they remembered most was the way he had looked at Delilah, even after 40-some years of marriage, as if she were the most precious thing in his world. Delilah grieved deeply, as was natural after losing the love of her life. But she did not fall apart. Gabriel had taught her too well, had made her too strong for that. She remained on the ranch, surrounded by her family, taking comfort in her children and grandchildren, in the life she and Gabriel had built together. She lived to the age of 78, and in those final years, she often told the story of how she had come to Arizona expecting cruelty in the cold, but had instead found a cowboy who promised her kindness always, and who had kept that promise until his last breath. When she finally passed, they buried her beside Gabriel on the hill overlooking the ranch, the place where he had first kissed her all those years ago. The sunset painted the desert in shades of gold that evening, and those who were there swore they could almost feel the presence of two spirits, reunited at last, walking hand in hand into the eternal Arizona sky they had loved so well. Their children and grandchildren continued to run the Triple Creek Ranch for generations, each one remembering the story of Gabriel and Delilah, of how they had met and fallen in love, and built a legacy of kindness and devotion. It became a family legend, told and retold, a reminder that love rooted in respect and nurtured by daily kindness could weather any storm and create something that lasted beyond a single lifetime. And in Bisbee, Arizona, people still remembered Clara Warren's boarding house, and the young woman from Philadelphia who had inherited it, and the cowboy who had helped her transform it and had ended up transforming her life. They remembered it as a love story for the ages, proof that even in the rough and tumble of the Wild West, true love could flourish and kindness could triumph, creating a legacy that would endure long after the protagonists had passed into legend.